Fantastic. Thank you, Arab, for leading a very informative and technical session. Also, thanks to our excellent keynote speakers for sharing your insights and your research or some modeling, some projections. Thank you once again. Well, coming up next, we are going to have a high-level dialogue led by Food and Agriculture Organization. So FAO will bring attention to and increase awareness about the importance of urban food systems in achieving the SDGs through their links to socio-economic development and to environmental and climate change related objectives. So I'm therefore pleased to introduce the moderator, Mr. Kostas Stamoulis, Senior Advisor to FAO. Kostas, over to you. Are you there with us? Yes.
Thank you very much, Christine. Good morning or good afternoon to everyone, depending on where you're joining us from. Let me just first say about some of the rules of the game. You know how to manage and handle these kinds of meetings by now. If you have any questions, please post them, and we're going to collect them and have a question and answer session. As Christine said, I'm a senior advisor at FAO. I was with FAO for 30 years in different positions until my retirement. On behalf of FAO, I would like to welcome everyone to this high-level dialogue on sustainable urban food systems for SDG acceleration. We are grateful to the Global Forum of Human Settlements for giving us this opportunity to contribute to the deliberations with a very important issue, which is actually catching on like a wildfire, both in the organization, but also, I think, in the discourse related to the Sustainable Development Goals. I am extremely honored to be here, but also that I was picked as a moderator for this extremely important, distinguished panel, but also the participants of this meeting. Our main objective is to bring attention and increase awareness on the importance of urban food systems in achieving the SDGs through the links of those systems to socioeconomic development and environmental and climate change targets. To do so, we asked our speakers and panelists to share some of the most pressing challenges that urban food systems face in broadening access to healthy diets and reducing environmental and climate change footprint, or as we call it, foodprint. The panel will also give some concrete examples of successful and innovative practices, approaches, and policy solutions aimed at strengthening the urban food system's contribution to sustainable food system transformation, to the overall transformation. We know that food systems are a major generator of a lot of environmental ills, but also the entry point for correcting a large part of our environmental and climate change ills. So we're also going to have some forward-looking reflections. So where do we go from here in transforming urban food systems towards SDG acceleration? However, before we hear from our distinguished panelists, we asked the chief economist of FAO, Máximo Torero, to help us set the scene by sharing with us latest updates on urbanization trends and urban food system challenges and transformation. Without further delay, I will ask our colleagues on the Global Forum to play Mr. Torero's video message. Thank you very much.
Dear colleagues, welcome to the 17th annual session of the Global Forum on Human Settlements. Given their sheer size, transformation of urban systems towards sustainability has the potential to generate numerous interconnected socioeconomic and environmental benefits. Cities and well-managed urban food systems have an important role in climate change mitigation and adaptation and addressing global hunger. Therefore, urban food systems will be indispensable for accelerating the achievements of the Sustainable Development Goals in the Paris Agreement on climate change. Currently, however, in the words of the United Secretary General, regrettably, the world is tremendously off track to meet SDGs, including the agri-food system-related ones. Let me bring a corporate report that we just published, The Future of Food and Agriculture, which looks at drivers and triggers of transformation and which helps to enrich our strategic thinking. This report states that the medium and long-term future of agri-food systems cannot be predicted, is complex, is under risk and uncertainties. And in this context, there are 18 drivers of the agri-food systems, and they bring together, for instance, population dynamics, economic growth and macroeconomic stability, science and innovation, poverty, inequality, climate change, and natural resources, just to mention some of them. But let me focus in the key ones that are affecting this transformation that we're discussing today. The first one is urbanization trends and urban food systems challenges for this transformation. The core element here is first, population dynamics. Trends such as increasing population and urbanization and macroeconomic instability, poverty and inequalities, competition over natural resources has created an impact over the environmental systems. Population dynamics in particular present interconnected implications for agri-food systems because demographic growth and structural change, urbanization and food demand are closely linked, which change the consumer patterns. Sustainable cities are central to achieving the SDGs because if current trends continue by 2050, cities will contain approximately 70% of the world population and produce 85% of the global economic output. Over 90% of the population increase will occur on low-income countries, especially in Africa and Asia. Africa's urban population increases to 454 million in 2019, from 58 million in 1970. Such demographic dynamics and rapid urbanization will change the way we do things, will change the way sustainability, health, production, natural resources will be managed together in these agri-food systems. At the same time, by 2050, South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa will become the regions with the highest proportion of rural people, both within more than 40% of the population living in rural areas, which means that there is certainly scope for rural development focus as well. This, as I mentioned before, will affect our consumption patterns. At present, 70% of all food produced globally is already for consumption in urban areas, even in countries with large rural populations. Cities are among the main contributors to greenhouse gas emissions, and food consumption has been found to be one of the main drivers of emissions, contributing to 13% of total emissions produced in the largest cities in 2017. Considering the urbanization trend, as urban food consumption increases, so does the weight of post-harvest farm-to-fork activities along longer value chains, thus increasing food system footprint and climate change. We know that most of the processing, the packaging, happens in peri-urban areas, what we call intermediate cities, and that, of course, is linked to bigger cities. Regarding food consumption trends, we observed that between 2000 and 2020, minimum dietary requirements have been growing even faster than population because of changes in demographic structure. During the same period of time, food consumption has been growing faster than dietary requirements. Despite this rapid growth of consumption, and because of the high level of inequality prevailing in all regions, almost 10% of the world population was undernourished in 2021, while 11.7% of the global population, around 920 million people, was severely food insecure in 2020, and 3.1 billion people could not afford the minimum cost healthy diet. In low and lower middle income countries, undernourishment is high in urban areas, creating a double burden, not only of undernourishment, but also overnutrition, obesity. And this creates significant challenges and non-communicable diseases for the future. Now, how urbanization changes dietary patterns? Urban diets tend to rely on increasingly narrow base of staple grains, as well as on greater consumption of animal source foods, oil, salt, sugar, and processed foods. Obesity and overweight prevalence are found among both the richer and the poorer urban dwellers. and the latter consume inexpensive processed foods, high in calories and low nutritional value, while the others consume expensive processed foods too. Although healthy diets are more affordable in urban areas because of higher incomes and despite often higher food prices, the urban poor, such as slum dwellers, frequently lack physical and economic access to healthy diets. Traditional and informal markets and food stalls coexist in urban areas with supermarkets, which have expanded rapidly around the world over the last century, and more recently in low-income countries. Low-income consumers are buying food in supermarkets attracted by cheap, time-saving processed foods. The main consequence of all this include the possible exclusion of smallholders from the dynamic markets in metropolitan cities. And we know there is a huge amount of literature led by Tom Riordan and other colleagues looking at the consequences of this process of the supermarket value chains. And this creates a greater availability, access, consumption of ultra-processed food through these value chains, which, as we know, will create harm to health and will have the implications of non-communicable diseases. Moreover, urban expansion is typically advancing in expense of agricultural land, forests, and biodiversity. These, among others, are the reasons why urbanization transforms our agri-food systems. A detailed analysis reveals that only on the food category for which urban households consume less than their demographic share is cereals and roots. This is staple food. Urban households spend much more on food per person than rural households. This reflects the fact that the share of urban households' consumption is always higher than the demographic share of total population, probably as a result of the higher levels of incomes, as I mentioned before. The larger share of urban consumption in total food consumption means that shifts in urban diets and urban demand for food have the potential to transform the agri-food system. This implies that provided urban populations consume locally produced foods, the demand of food can be a major source of demand for local agriculture. But here is where we need to be careful and keep the balance. We need, on one side, to be able to supply what the cities needs and the new demands. But we need to be sure also on the other side that the demand is more related to healthy foods. So the combination of this supply and demand is the balance that we want. Local procurement can help to develop the local agri-food system. But also we need to think on the comparative advantage so that we use our natural resources in the most efficient way. And that's where trade, global and interregional trade would also play a role. So urbanization does not only increase overall demand of food, but it also changes the composition of the demand. And we need to work together so that that demand and supply matches, both locally, regionally, and internationally and globally. Now, when we look at the urbanization, we need also to look at the rural-urban linkages. The rural-urban contrast no longer appears to be an adequate axis. On the contrary, seems to be a continuum from the very rural, intermediate cities and to the big cities. The relationship between urban and rural areas has changed. The borders between the two are increasingly blurred and becoming more interdependent. Even the definition of what is rural depends on country by country. But the important thing is that the value chains now move across the rural-urban continuum, from the production to the processing, to the packaging, to the commercialization in the different value chains. For example, in 2018, 15% of the world population resided in urban areas and 85% live in or within 3 hours of urban center at least 50,000 inhabitants. This is what we call the intermediate cities. Agri-food systems thus should no longer be considered from the rural perspective only. Urbanization, rural-urban areas should be seen as an integrated entity, a continuum. A considerable part of the activities conducted in agricultural value chains are set within close to towns in peri-urban areas for a very simple reason. You need energy. You need access to the local markets, to the urban markets. Progress in transportation, infrastructure, and communications facilitate this rural-urban continuum and the links between food production and consumption patterns. Towns and small intermediate cities could become hubs for downstream agri-food systems activities, provided policy and public investment catalyzes the establishment of agro-industrial zones and adoption of productive enhancing innovations. For example, intermediate cities already play an important role in providing basic facilities and services to the rural areas. They could even play a greater role in food systems by hosting farmer markets, agro-processing units, packaging plants, agro-processing plants, and other food and agriculture-related facilities. As the spatial integration between urban areas and surrounding peri-urban and rural areas increases, urban food consumption patterns and food systems transformation will increasingly shape what is produced and how it is produced, processed, distributed, and disposed of, which in turn points to a food governance system which goes beyond administrative limits to include territories, including cities and surrounding catchment areas. The result is increasing complexity in managing the urban and territorial food system, especially as the trade-offs between sustainability targets multiply. But it's really important that we also start thinking in those trade-offs, and we need to start measuring them, and we need to find ways and pathways through which we can minimize them. This means that whoever is concerned with the future of the agri-food in agricultural agri-food systems and the urbanization, we need to look at this rural-urban continuum as an integrated whole. Agri-food system transformation and people-centered urban development are fundamental prerequisites for wider sustainable development and for ultimate achievement of the 2030 Agenda. FAO, for example, through its Green Cities Initiative, in particular, its urban food agenda, and with the support of the Office of Sustainable Development Goals, works to support sustainable urban agri-food system transformation as a fundamental prerequisite for wider sustainable development transformation. FAO promotes resilient, integrated, sustainable, and inclusive food systems able to ensure that all people in all places are free from hunger and all forms of malnutrition, both under and over nutrition. We support healthy urban environment which is able to contribute to climate change mitigation and adaptation and sustainable resource management and the strengthening of the urban-rural linkages. In addition, considering the challenges of evidence-based policy making in terms of lack of data, subnational level, the FAO hand-in-hand initiative, for example, through its geospatial platform and the annual state of food insecurity in the world, we aim as FAO to increasingly enable availability of geospatial data below national level. We are working on access to healthy diets, and our goal is not only to achieve SDG 2 in terms of calories, we want to achieve SDG 2 in terms of access to healthy diets. And that requires for us to take into account this rural-urban continuum. It requires us to take into account the demand side of the urban populations, their consumption patterns, change their behavior towards consumption of healthy diets, and have the capacity of the production side in this rural-urban continuum to respond to those demands so that we can reduce chronic undernourishment and also at the same time reduce overweight and obesity. We are looking for a better world, a more effective and efficient, a world where we can produce more with less, but satisfy these drivers that are changing the way we consume and what we consume and how we produce. And we need to produce in a sustainable environment for tomorrow. Thank you very much, and it was a pleasure to be with you, and I hope you have a fruitful discussion today. Thank
you. Back to our virtual connection. First of all, of course, if we could applaud, if we were in a physical meeting, we would all be applauding big time, because Maximo gave a really tour de force into some of these issues, key issues which deal with urban food systems and the challenges we face. You know, everybody has a little passion, and I have when you talk about urban food systems, I will pick something from what Maximo said and just put it in front of you. No? I like to talk about three continuums, not three. The first continuum is the links between the components of the food system, from production to the final consumer. Those based on technology, demographics, etc., they link more together. That's one continuum. The second continuum is what Maximo said, the sharp distinctions between rural and urban, with, of course, variations among the regions and places and countries, is disappearing. Now that we have progressed with the geolocation of households and individuals, we know some updated data they show that 90% of world population lives within 1 hour of a city of 20,000 people or more, which is key. The catchment areas of cities increase. And so anything we do in an urban space have ripple effects throughout the food system. And finally, the distinction between rural settlements that we had one time and mega cities is not valid. The host of small, medium level cities and rural towns is increasing. And that's the most dynamic and perspective part of the demographic change. That is where populations will be located. So as Maximo said, there is a lot of things that those small cities and towns hold in terms of food systems function. However, you're not here today to listen to my monologues, but to listen to our panelists, right? What's more important than what do I say. In this context, let me say with regret that we were informed yesterday by the Office of Vice Mayor of Nairobi that he won't be able to attend for urgent tasks that he has to attend to, that he won't be here with us. So that's unfortunate, but it gives more time to the rest of the panelists. Let me now turn to the rest of the panel. You will see their bios on the chat box as I introduce them. You can have more details about their activities. They are a diverse group and will provide us with global, regional, and country perspectives on food system transformation. I want to thank all of them again for accepting our invitation to share their views and experience. I will first go to Professor Roberta Sonnino, who is Professor of Sustainable Food Systems at the University of Surrey. And Roberta and I know each other for a while. Roberta has been played an important role in helping us shape what we call today the FAO framework on the urban food agenda, which is still the guiding framework for FAO's work on urban food system transformation. So Roberta, your work focuses on urban food systems, food system transformation, food security policy, and urban-rural linkages, a wide array of issues. From a global perspective, can you give us an idea on what cities are doing to improve their urban food consumption and improve and sustainability? And importantly, what are the obstacles they face? Thank you, Sonnino.
Thank you.
You have the floor. Roberta, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Costas. Hello, everyone. I think we heard a lot about the obstacles from Maximo at the start of this session that cities are facing, and I'll come back to this towards the end of my remarks. But it's important, I think, to understand and realize that cities are doing a lot, both in the global north and in the global south, to improve food consumption in urban areas, and at the same time, in many cases, mitigate its environmental implications. For the sake of time, I'm going to mention two key policy instruments that have been utilized to this effect. First of all, public food procurement. Of course, the city governments are using the power of purchase to foster healthier diets in public canteens. I'm thinking about the case of Belo Horizonte in Brazil, or in other cases, connect healthier diets with obviously decarbonization targets. And this is often the case in Nordic countries. I'm thinking about the city of Copenhagen and its sterling work to try to introduce more environmentally friendly ingredients and reduce meat consumption. The second main instrument cities resort to are what we might term food-sensitive planning frameworks, which, for example, are creating space for the cultivation of urban and peri-urban land, to diversify, obviously, the urban diets. I'm thinking about the flagship program of the city of Rosario in Argentina, Or I'm thinking about the use of zoning and regulations, which is the case in many North American cities, to try and prevent what Maximo was alluding to in his initial remarks, the excessive concentration of unhealthy food in the urban environment. Now, there's a huge diversity, but I would say that we could identify some shared features of this type of urban food policies. First of all, and I'll go back to the point you made, Kostas, in many cases, these initiatives are part of a conscious effort to shorten and simplify supply chains. So we are indeed witnessing the emergence of new functional units, we might call them, new more integrated territorial entities that are giving tangible meaning to the concept of city-region food systems, a concept that FAO has done a lot of work on. The second shared feature is that food consumption is almost never addressed in isolation from other food policy priorities. So the initiatives I mentioned tend to be enshrined within systemic, integrated urban food strategies that are really extolling, at least in theory, the cross-sectoral nature of food or its capacity to expose the codependency of the Sustainable Development Goals. But this is not to say, unfortunately, that city policies and strategies are transforming food systems. In my view, the urban foodscape is still quite fragmented. We do see a patchwork of fragmented initiatives. And contrary to the continuum that Kostas mentioned in his remarks, I think the key obstacle here is the fractured nature of food systems. Food systems are fractured along the vertical governance scale, local, global. They are fractured across the horizontal, sectoral, and territorial governance scale. And this really is stymieing coherent and sustained policy action in many different ways. Again, I want to try and be as brief as possible. I'll mention one key obstacle that was referred to by Maximo before me, the lack of data, the lack of an evidence base for urban food policy making, because data and statistics that are collected at the global and national level, unfortunately, are seldom disaggregated. And this means that cities do not have context-specific data and information that could help them to identify specific policy priorities. This is bringing into the conversation for me, and I'm going to end on this point, the role of national governments, not just as key potential funders of new science policy society interface mechanisms that could help us building capacity, collecting data, but also we need to think about the role of national governments in addressing the fractures I mentioned through, for example, more sensitive trade agreements, targeted tax, price, and advertising policies, combined with the setting of clear decarbonization targets, which also fall under the responsibility of national governments, to create opportunities for private sector actors who don't operate on the basis of market considerations only. And the role of national governments also in terms of investing in infrastructure, the infrastructure of the food system, which we are losing in many areas of the world. The national governments have the mandate, they have the resources to create well-connected city-region food systems that can facilitate and sustain interactions between food system actors across jurisdictions and across set boundaries. So I'll finish on this point. Food system transformation is a multi-scalar process. City governments have been doing a lot. They've been changing the political culture around food, but they cannot do it all alone.
Roberta, thank you very much for putting a sense also among all these important things on how the integration in terms of management of the food system. So the elements for a multi-scalar management are there. They should be, like the needs are there, but the practice is different. So before we start talking about the continuums, that is the links that already exist, we should also talk about the types of policy and governance frameworks that actually make those things work. Maybe some of these things work despite and behind the back of formal actors, right? Is the private sector, the small farmers, the small processors, etc., that make some of those things tick. But unless you have a policy that facilitates all this, I think we're going not very far. So put a little break on my enthusiasm regarding the continuums, but I think that's a touch of reality that we need as we chart the way forward. I spoke too much again, but it's my pleasure to go to our next speaker, which is Andrea Magarini, Food Policy Director in the city of Milan. And most of us that have an interest in some activity regarding urban food systems, we know Andrea and his work, and we of course know the incredible steps that the city of Milan has taken in its own space and territory, but also in connecting cities around the world, the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact that joins cities around the world around food issues. But let's first talk about the city of Milan, Andrea. You're the director of the food policy department of the city of Milan. So you're a participant on some of those achievements, and you have a 60-degree overview of what the city is able to achieve and also the means and the practices to achieve them. So just tell us then about the city of Milan's major achievements and how did you manage to do it? Do you have a fragmented system? Do you have national support? In any case, I leave this to you. Andrea, you have the floor. It's a great pleasure to have you here.
Thank you indeed, Costa, and thank you also to the friend of FAO and to the other panelists that again we are working a lot together in this field of action. Yeah, so is a very good question, and also let me start by sharing how we try to work betterly with our colleagues within a municipality in order to overlap the fragmentation and so on. So when we start in 2014 and 15, so about 7 years ago, we start by a big research of our food system and of our effort on the food system by engaging all the other departments and try to see what all the departments are doing in the field of food system. And at that moment, in 2014, we define 61 activities that are organizing by all the departments on the topic of food systems, some from agriculture, school canteens, food aid, and so on. And also 22 activities that were implemented by our municipal agencies. Also together with all of our partners by trying to see the different effort. Our municipality, through a strong political commitment, decided to define a small office that I was the pleasure to lead at that moment, that tried to support all of them to work better together in the field of define new activities and define a new governance structure of our efforts. And so we started defining project, apply to grant, reorient our local budget, try to have a new partnership with some local partners. And after 7 years, now we have about 249 local partners working. Okay, that are working with all of our departments. So now we change our structure. Now we are a department with 5 different units, different budget that now we have. So the food policy budgeting is, I think, one of the next frontier, next generation of activities that we need to do, that we need to see in our municipal budget, and how these budgets are for managing public food services like school canteens, or to implement infrastructure. And in this infrastructure, how are the impact of this infrastructure, how they are connected to local partners, to other actors of our local food system. And by doing this, we can work in a better integration, a better cohesive food system. For having this kind of approach, we need to have a very strong political commitment from the mayor, from the vice mayor, if we have vice mayor, from the deputies. And so they need to be engaged. We need to have an accountability to our city council with the approach that we are doing. And by doing this, we are entering in the deep state, as in some countries are doing, but in the deep administrative structure of our municipalities. And by doing this, we need to enter in the municipal planning tools, in the municipal planning instruments, because by doing this, we can become really a part of a municipality, not in a fragmented way, but try to interconnect school canteens with agriculture, food aid to school canteens, the fighting against food waste, to all the activities of becoming more efficient as a food system as a whole. And as Roberta mentioned, the topic of data. We need data, we need a lot of data. During the pandemic, all of us are doing incredible effort against food aid. And with the Milan Pact, with C40, we are known now that there are cities like Milan, like Boston, New York, Seattle, London, Melbourne, Seoul, that have a lot of new data, fresh data on the topic of food poverty in our cities. And with this data, we need to do innovative effort, try to have an intentionality to the neighborhood we more affected to those problems. And with this approach, we can reshape the food system environment, the food environment. So are different topics in which we are working. In Milan, again, we are trying to work also with our government. In this afternoon, or if not this afternoon, next Monday, our city council will approve a new investment for having a new infrastructure of 22 million euros, in which half is paid by government and the other half is paid directly from the municipal budget, for establishing a new cooking center for the school canteens and a new logistic center for the school canteens. So our food infrastructure are moving, are shaping our opportunities, and we need to have, as Hugh Cosas mentioned, 360% of overview of our activities. And if we can doing this, we can doing a lot of impact. We need to monitor our impact and to try to reshape our food infrastructure for a better food system for us as citizens and for the future, because if we invest now, we can see the results after 10 or 20 years, but we need to maintain this kind of intentionality from the past, from the present, and for the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrea. I think you showed the way on some of the concerns that Roberta expressed, at least how the different food activities are coordinated. You have a mechanism to make sure that they don't work at cross purposes. And there are a lot that they have food components in the activity. So you have, then you are part of the as you say, municipal planning tool that is part of the plan of the municipality. So you have the connection, so that there is a connection within the food system in Milan with all the activities, with the city, like part of the city planning, which is a dream world for me and for Roberta and for others here. And then you have the links to the government, right? You do resource mobilization on behalf of food programs, et cetera, et cetera. This is very important. I just have one short question, if you have 1 minute. What about your links, not with other cities? I'm going to ask you about the Milan Pact afterwards, but other actors outside the city. I don't know, farmers organizations or other things to support the canteens. Is this the catchment area of the city? Do you have, if you can spend 1 minute to talk about this, I think we'll complete something about the city of Milan.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, we established in 2012 a set of agricultural districts that engage 188 farmers. And with all of these farmers, we have a room of cooperation. We do a deal and we have a meeting space each month in which we are organizing our action plans, are proposing short supply chains, organizing effort during the drought last summer, exploiting more water for agriculture and so on. And it's very important, is a set of space that we need to have also in other field of action. We are doing, again, the same approach also with food aid by engaging all the about 200 of charities, NGOs, church, associations that are working on supporting people in needs. And in this way, the municipality are working as coordinator and to try to exploit some driver for them. We are now launching a new grant for improving the small infrastructure of the different charities that are shaping, that are moving their food aid to people in needs. Yeah, but we need to have space of cooperation, formalize. We implement some community of practices in which each time per year we are meeting with all of these communities and we are trying to propose our goals to them and to know from them their activities. And together we are changing and we are becoming a more cohesive food system. So the answer is yes, we need to do this. And there are some tricky to doing this. Within the report of the FAO, there are a lot of energy on this, within the report of the Milan Pact and so on. But we need to engage our local partners and to working with them with an intentionality to the goal that we want to achieve together. You are mute.
Let me, thank you. Thank you very much. Let me go to our next speaker, who is Shulang Fei, who is research scientist, the Institute of Urban Agriculture, Chinese Academy of Agricultural Science. Welcome, Shulang. I had the pleasure of meeting Shulang a few days ago as we were coordinating. I looked at her work on the web, and it's really extremely rich on all sorts of aspects on urban food stuff. Thank you very much for joining. You are in the Chinese megacity, right? Chengdu. And if it's a Chinese megacity, imagine what is it for other small countries, a super megacity. The issue is urban and very urban agriculture. And there is quite a bit of discussion with the FAO. There are some very important initiatives on urban agriculture. Some of the players are among the audience, and I'm sure they will be very interested to hear what you have to say. Could you tell us then what are the benefits and shortcomings of urban and peri-urban agriculture in trying to improve diets and the footprint, as we call it, the urban footprint, and how important do you think the urban agriculture is for the future of urban food systems? Thank you.
Thank you, Kostas, and thank you very much for this wonderful opportunity to share what we have been observing in China and specifically in Chengdu, because our institute is located in Chengdu and it is really super mega city in China. And so briefly introduce Chengdu. It's a mega city with more than 20 million inhabitants, 20 million, yes. And also it's a national level central city. So meaning it's a better kind of better developed city in its region and a leading city in the metropolitan area. So we think it's very important to have a well-developed city region food systems for not only Chengdu, but also the entire region. And in terms of how the city is serving for the residents' healthy diets, from overview, from a general food system perspective, we have done some preliminary mapping for Chengdu. For the city, and we found the food supply systems in the city is relatively complete, although complex. From the production side, mainly urban and peri-urban agriculture, which I will go into further later, and also the wholesaling systems in which two large-scale markets serving as a key regional food distribution hubs are located in Chengdu, and there is also a series of more localized and specialized markets across the city serving for the wholesaling. And also on the retailing side, there are more than thousands of farmer markets, fresh food supermarkets, and neighborhood grocery stores for residents' direct food access. And also, as you may know, online food shopping is also a very popular way for consumers to access their food. So that's also a very general trend for food consumption and supply. And in terms of the urban and peri-urban agriculture, which is normally considered as contributors of short supply chains and also local food system resilience, in Chengdu, it is quite an important component for food supply. And so we think it from 4 dimensions, basically, in terms of its contributions to the city development. And the first is definitely the food supply, because Chengdu is a big city with not only high populated inter-urban areas, but also a large area for agriculture and around the inter-urban areas. And statistically, there is calculation on the production of staple food, vegetables, fruit of the urban and peri-urban agriculture in Chengdu, and it shows they could pretty much cover the consumption needs in the city. Although this doesn't necessarily refer to where exactly the food consumed by the city is from. And so this, in a way, provide a kind of guarantee mechanism in case of emergencies and disruptions of food import of the city. And the second dimension is the economic, which I refer to the development of industry in agriculture. So we think because of the geographical location of urban and peri-urban agriculture in between urban and rural, which is really close to the city's resources. So we think urban agriculture is a key driver for technology innovation and further to facilitate the agriculture modernization, which is a main goal in China's agriculture development. And the third dimension comes to the environmental contribution. So on the one hand, the increasing demands on healthier food consumption in cities will drive the transformation in UPA, I mean urban agriculture production systems, to kind of reduce the use of chemicals in the peri-urban farmlands. And on the other side, the intra-urban urban agriculture practices, which make the use of wastewater and organic waste in the cities could further contribute to the resource recycling in the city systems. And the last dimension goes to the social aspect, because urban agriculture, from our understanding, is definitely not just food production, but can be integrated with so many other industries form, and in a way form new industry patterns and also consumption scenarios. For example, we can combine agriculture with tourism, recreation, experience, health and education, etc. So on one hand, this can serve the city dwellers needs nowadays within reachable distance, and also these kind of newly emerged industry patterns, as well as the more developed and modernized agriculture in production itself can improve the income and employment for the peri-urban and even rural producers and practitioners. So that's the main contributions we think of urban agriculture for the cities. And there are also challenges, of course. One is we think from our research observations, we think there is a lack of concrete evaluation systems for urban agriculture for its contributions to the city. And we are still using kind of traditional systems to classify it into the first, second, third industry classification, rather than to combine all together and to really recognize the multifunctions of urban agriculture. And this can be an obstacle to further develop these kind of industries. And also other challenges, including the land use conflict and etc. So I think that's my answer to that.
Thank you, Shulan. Let me ask you a question that there is an active chat box from what I understand. But let me ask a question concerning urban agriculture. In the discussion we had in preparing for this event, you talked about dedicated space, which is mandated by the central government, and maybe I'm wrong, and please correct me, for urban agriculture. So there is a protected area that has to be devoted to urban agriculture. And if the city sprawls, right, and property values increase, et cetera, this space is protected. Is that the case? Or there are other links with the national government which you consider extremely important for the growth of urban agriculture in Chengdu?
Yeah, because agriculture, I mean, urban and peri-urban agriculture is considered very important for the city development. So it's in fact integrated into the overall development planning of the city. For example, in the 14th five-year period development plan, we have a lot of actions that support how we do urban and peri-urban agriculture. And to give more details on that, maybe we have a kind of a strategy framework for urban agriculture, and to translate it into English, it's like a one system plus two pillars structure. And the one system meaning the industrial system, and we have identified the 4+6 industry for urban and peri-urban development, and the 4 refer to for basic production industries like staple food, the livestock, vegetable and fruit, and the 6 meaning the some supporting industries, including like breeding, digital agriculture, smart infrastructure and cold chain, leisure and agricultural expo. And the 2 pillars here one is the development of agricultural zones, which is kind of innovative organization, how we gather resources in different dimensions to support particular industry. for urban agriculture. And the second pillar goes to the promotion in agricultural science and technology innovation, and there's a lot of supporting policies in R&D in urban agriculture. And for example, our institute is from the Chinese Academy of Agricultural Sciences, and now in the collaboration of CAS, of the Chinese Academy of Agricultural Sciences, and the Chengdu municipal government, now we are also having another center called the Chengdu Agricultural Science and Technology Center, and which we are also in that. So to promote more and more innovations in this field. So there's quite a lot of support on that.
Thank you, Vix, very much. I'm sure that the city of Milan is green with envy because you have a competitor in China on planning urban food systems. Thank you, Shulang. Extremely interesting. As I said, we don't have the fourth panelist, but and we have a little bit of time, so I'm just going to pick and choose some questions for the panelists based on what has been said or what they said. Roberta, can you? There were several issues that could be addressed from what you said, and it could be followed up. But I'm interested in the whole issue of supply chains, territorial entities, etc. And we always praise the short supply chains. We say short supply chains are less vulnerable to shocks. That's what happened during COVID. They have a smaller environmental footprint, etc. Can you, especially on the environmental footprint, right? Can we elaborate a little bit on that? Is it something that every let's say city catchment area should strive for, or there are alternatives that are actually they combine better socioeconomic and environmental objectives? Sorry for bringing you on the spot, but that you raised it.
Thanks, Kostas. I think obviously when we talk about cities, we are implying an enormous geographical diversity. And there are many studies showing that from a carbon perspective, it may be safer, environmentally speaking, it may be better importing food from another countries than, for example, growing tomatoes locally using greenhouses. So I think there are indications that are emerging from the urban world about how the food system should be organized as local as possible. But for some cities, that's not going to be very local. And there are cities for which it won't be local at all. So I would say the one really interesting data that emerges from the literature is that there is a concerted effort, as I said, to shorten supply chains. So cities are invariably trying to shorten the supply chain. And they're always doing it with what I would call a quite cosmopolitan, almost type of attitude. So we are not witnessing defensive localization tendencies. They are not shortening supply chains at the expenses of other cities or surrounding rural areas. It's part of the mix. And I would say, answering your question, it is definitely an important strategy, but it's not the only one, and it doesn't work for all cities.
Interesting. Interesting response by Andrea in the chat regarding this catchment areas and where do they the distance through which they buy food or where they buy organic food. So the city has set some I don't know, limits or rules about that. Andrea, you want to spend half a minute talking about this, and then I would like you to spend another minute talking about the power of city networks in changing the picture, right? And improving the governance of systems. How do you feel? You have the floor, Andrea.
No, about the scale is very important to have a geography of your food system before you need to represent. So to have a geography, a concrete geography, so a map with your city, your infrastructure, your agricultural surface, your farmers, and so on. And we are trying to have a dual scale, one for working directly, knowing each other. In the afternoon, I will be with some farmers speaking about water and so on. So with local farmers, we are working directly. In some cases, we are also own the land and the farm that we are renting to them. And on the other hand, when we speak about procurement, so we are buying about 10,000 of tons of food per year for our school canteens. And in this way, we have a premiality for the tender, premiality for local agriculture, premiality for 0 kilometer, premiality for organic. And in this way, we are speaking about a proximity of 30, 70 kilometers from Milan. So the food shape are on this scale. Coming back to the second question, so the power of networking with our cities. We are leading the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact since 2015, and I think that the more added value is know each other, because only working together, only working hands-on this field of action, we can transform our daily activities. This is the first types. Then working to sharing knowledge within the cities that are part of the Milan Pact, and also with all the network. We are working, doing webinar, doing also deep activities with joint projects and so on. A few months ago with James Battersby, that was another speaker of today, with Neville Cohen and other, we are working on food environment, engaging some different cities that want to implement and to have an intentionality to the zoning, as Roberta mentioned. So we need to enter working with our urbanism department. That is the more difficult because they are working only on land planning, land use, and so on. And I think, or for instance, from my personal perspective, for me, it's very complicated work with, and I see also with other colleagues work with the urban department, the urbanism department, and so on. And yeah, I think this is the more added value. Again, we invent a solution that is very simple, is an award. A few years ago, when the Milan Pact starting, so the different mayor coming in Milan, singing a paper, yes, declaring their commitment, what happening after. And we, together with the Caiplo Foundation and together with the FAO and other partners, we have this idea to having an award that from one side award the most innovative practices. Interesting, not the main goal. On the other hand, we are seeing concretely year by year the different improvement of the different cities that are implementing their local food policies. Now we are collecting 630 urban food policies officially approved by the more than 200 of mayors of the Milan Pact. And we engage as a committee of evaluation that each year have dozens of experts and institutions like FAO, like other. And by doing this, we are sharing all of these 600 of practices in 5 years with all also of other organizations. So the Ellen MacArthur Foundation a few years ago launched an initiative on urban food system, and you were part of this committee. The FAO, you know, better than me, are doing the same. And again, also other partners, the European Commissions. Roberta was part of this committee a few years ago. Jane is again part of this committee in the last edition. So we are doing to have this award as a tool to engage partners, sharing the practices of cities, asking cities to submit practices and to be evaluated by this committee. So are a way to see what the different cities are doing after signing the pact, after signing a paper. So in this way, yes, is working very well, I think. But I'm a part of this, so I'm not the best person to say if there is impact on this.
Thank you, Andrea. I think you are a very informative partisan in this case. That is, we all think that the Milan Pact is an important role, just at the least, to raise the awareness about the importance of urban food, right? Which is among cities, which leads me. There is in the chat box. There are questions about data, what kind of data we need, et cetera, et cetera. And I think an old friend and collaborator in FAO has asked this question that cities in some of the low-income countries do not have the resources and the capacities to collect data, right? And the other question is what level data do actually need to do a proper city planning, right? So the first question, I think, to Thierry, my response would be: the big problem is that the data and the cities and let's say the donors, to put it in quote marks, will help cities collect better data if this whole issue of the importance of urban food systems becomes a household term. That is, it will go hand in hand with this. Of course, until that happens, we will operate with whatever, trying to do the best what we have. I think FAO, within the context of the data platform of the Hand in Hand initiative, are planning, and we have actually collected some geolocal data for purposes of analysis, et cetera, et cetera. But Thierry's question is that the cities should be able to have a minimum capacity to collect data. Question well taken. What is the level of data? We'll take that up. I think that's an important question, right? It will take that up, but before we start again with a question and answer to the panelists, I would like to be my pleasure to invite Jane Battersby, Dr. Jane Battersby, which is a professor at the University of Cape Town and a scholar at the African Center for Cities, to help us reflect on things that we've heard so far, but also some of her knowledge, which I asked her to present to us here about the future, let's say, of cities, especially in Africa, and with rapid urbanization, what will be the stresses, et cetera, et cetera. Jane, you have the floor. Jane is absolutely capable of taking a complex issue and turn it into, simple concepts and communicate them. So please, when you have something like that, invite her. And if you want a simple issue to be complex and impossible to understand, you invite me. So Jane, you have the floor. It's a great pleasure to see you again. You helped us a lot in the past in many of our events. Please.